Welcome everyone to our final speaker event of Michaelmas term actually, and one I've been waiting for all term. I am really excited to introduce Trevor Horn to the Cambridge Union. Trevor's a British producer, he's a songwriter, he's a musician. He rose to fame, I'm sure you'll remember, with the Buggles and with the incredible hit that I'm sure many of you are fans of, Video Killed the Radio Star. He then went on to work with Yes. He's produced some of pop's most iconic bands, working with John Legend, the Pet Shop Boys, and Robbie Williams. So I'm sure you're very excited to hear from him. For the format of the event, I know a lot of questions from the audience, so I'm going to keep my portion quite short. I've got a few questions for you, and then I'm going to hand over to our wonderful members. Okay. But I wanted to start by sort of going back to the early stages of your career. You've done so much, and I think that's what sort of really struck me. I knew you for sort of Yes and for the Buggles, but in the research, you've got this incredible multi-decade career of producing so much work. If you could be remembered for one thing, what would you choose?
I don't think I have to choose. I think everybody will remember me with Video Killed the Radio Star, because I'll probably, out of the things that I've done, yeah, I mean, you know, Relax and yeah, obviously, and some of those records have gone around the world, but Video Killed the Radio Star seems to pop up everywhere, you know. They asked me to play it in China not long ago, and I was like, I haven't seen a single royalty statement from China. And they said, oh, no, it's hugely popular in China. Well, I don't know what they make of it. So I'd probably be, whatever I'd like to be remembered for, that's what I will be remembered for.
And are you happy about that, or would you choose something else?
I don't have a choice, really. I did it. It's my fault. So I think I was, you know, lucky enough to make a few good records. I think Under a Lonely Heart was a good record. I think I made a few of the first kinds of certain types of record, you know.
And just on Video Killed the Radio Star, I think what's always struck me is it's an amazing song, it's really catchy, but it sits alongside this iconic music video, and the visuals are sort of famous for it. Is that something that you thought about in producing it?
No, I actually didn't think much about the video at all. It was only after we made the record that suddenly having a video became like a big thing. And a lot of bands sort of did their own videos, but I never really thought that I had much of a visual sense. So I just we looked through everybody's portfolio, and we chose this guy, Russell Mulcahy. And he was the guy that did all the Highlander films. And we said to him, we met him, we played him the record, and he loved it. And we said to him, do whatever you want. We'll just do it. I mean, within reason, you know. And I think that's the first time anybody ever said that to him. So, you know, it was, when we actually shot that video, it was like a day. We did the whole thing in a day, and it was, you know, lean into this light, mime to the first two lines. Right, that's that shot. You know, stand in this tube, you know, it was crazy. I had no idea what it was going to come out like. And when I saw it, of course, I thought the front was great when I'm leaning into the light, but when I'm wearing the silver suit at the end, I never watch that bit. You know, it's like cringe factor 10.
So just picking up on something I feel like you keep mentioning, you've been at the forefront of a lot of firsts. You were sort of early to the music video, and you mentioned before you were sort of produced the first type of a lot of different records. What have you sort of pioneered that you look back on and are sort of pleased with? Or what did you start off that you see thriving now?
Well, the thing is, back in the early 80s, I was one of the first people to have a Fairlight, which was a digital recorder, because they were so expensive. They cost £18,000. And you know, £18,000, you can buy a house. But I sold a lot of copies of Video Killed the Radio Star, so I had some money, and I always poured my money back into music. So I was one of the first people that understood what that thing was capable of, and I was actually in a position to use it in an interesting way. And it was like one of those moments where you're the first person doing it. So the field is like wide open. You say, okay, you know, this song's called Date Stamped. Why don't we have some cash registers in it, you know? And you could manipulate the sound of a cash register and using echoes and how you place it to make it something interesting. And I think we were the first people to do that kind of thing. And for a very short period of time, nobody knew how it worked or what we were doing. Apart from a couple of people, maybe Kate Bush and Peter Gabriel, because they both had Fairlights, but they were artists, you know. They didn't have to make a record. So I mean, back in the early 80s, producers would kind of ask me, what are you doing, you know? What are you doing? How did you do that? You say, well, it's this thing called the Fairlight. But if you didn't have one and you didn't know how it worked, then you wouldn't do that. And I was also, it's one of the few sensible things I ever did was I gave it to a guy called J.J. Yanchalik, who was really a geography teacher, but was obsessed with music. And he spent like years in the back room working with it. And because he wasn't a musician, he would come up with the most off-the-wall stuff. Like, you know, we were doing a 12-inch of something, and he came and he said, I've got a perfect thing for this bit here. And it was Wimbledon, tennis match. You know, 40, love, 40, 15. And it was funny, you know, the whack, whack. And the fact that you could play all of those things in time was amazing. And like I say, for a few years, it was great. And then Akai brought out a S900 sampler, and everybody could do it.
I'm really interested in that time, actually, in the sort of the late 70s, early 80s that you spent with the Buggles, because it must have been a very different world musically to the one you see now. So what was the culture like for a creator?
Well, you couldn't, you know, these days, if you want to make a backing track, you've got so many different ways to do it. You can program it, you can play it, you can use a combination of programming and playing. Back in the late 70s, if you wanted a backing track, you had to play it. You know, there was no... Drum machines came along round about probably 1980, I think was... You know, we had very crude ones, like a TR-808, but something like a Linn drum machine, which only for people who are train spotters will know, that had the sound of real drums on it. And that's one of the big things that changed. In the late 70s, when I started producing, I was constantly arguing with drummers. I wanted them to play 4 on the floor. I wanted them to stop doing stupid, complicated jazz kick drum patterns. And it was a constant fight. When the drum machine came out, no arguing. It was fantastic. That was one of the big things that really changed. But it was much more about sort of, things were more about performance. But in lots of ways, it was still the same in that it was incredibly competitive. You know, every week, hundreds of records would be released. If you wanted to break through all of that, you had to figure out, you had to do something special. Or, you know, you had to be in a band and gradually, you know, work your way up. But, you know, I was in a cleft stick because I was a producer, but I couldn't get my hands on a famous artist to produce. So I had to do it myself. And then once I had a hit, it's almost like I had a diploma on the wall, like you get from here, a degree. I didn't have a degree. I just had a gold disc for Video Killed the Radio Star, which showed that I got it right once, you know? So it makes a lot of difference.
So obviously throughout your career, you've been a musician, a songwriter, an artist, and a producer. Have you always felt at heart then a producer?
Well, I always think that's what I did best, really. But you know, I still like singing and playing, and but you know, as a singer and a player, I'm not really world class, I don't think. Whereas there was one point where, as a producer, I was world class, I think. You know?
So I'm quite interested in a band where you've done both of those things, actually. And obviously, I know you joined Yes and you toured drama with Yes and you replaced their lead singer, but you also went on to produce for them.
Yeah.
How is the relationship different to a band when you're singing in it and then you're producing for them?
Well, the singer with Yes, John Anderson, it was legendarily high voice, you know, incredibly high. And when I only got to be the singer because I tried to pitch the bass player a song called We Can Fly From Here, and I sang a bit of it to him. And he said, "You sound a bit like John Anderson." And I had no idea what that would lead to, that I would end up on stage at Madison Square Gardens in front of 25,000 people trying to be John Anderson. And that was no joke, because John Anderson sings, "A man conceived a moment's answers to..." It's really high, everything he sings. And his voice is pitched probably a minor third above mine. So he could get to like high B's and C's relatively easily, where I had to sort of really try hard. When I was a singer in Yes, I learned a lot. I learned that I wasn't good enough to be the singer in Yes. I just didn't have that. But what it did was it when I went back and produced them, which was it's their biggest selling album, 90125. I'd been in the band, so I could do a lot more emotional manipulation than one normally could, because I knew them all well. And at times, it did, to get something like Under a Lonely Heart done with a band like Yes, took a lot of manipulation. They didn't want to do it, I mean, they really didn't want to do it. I had to get down on my knees and beg and crawl around the floor and make them really embarrassed. Because they kept, I've got a book out and I talk about it in the book. I had a deputy, we tried to do a backing track for Under a Lonely Heart for like a week. And the riff, you don't probably remember it, because it's really simple. It goes, dum, do dum, do dum, do dum, dum, do dum, do dum. Like that, right? I think Yes did every variation of that. Dum, 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 ga-da-dum, gum, gum, bam, dum, da-da-dum. Oh, we tried everything. And then one day I went in and there was a deputation waiting for me. Do we think this song's all wrong for us? I was like, please, please, please do this song. I'm a famous producer. I've just got a lot of success. If I don't have a success with you, you'll shoot my star down, You promised me you'd do it. Please. And I think I was so embarrassing that because what I told them that I wanted to do was program it. I wanted to put it in the drum machine, and I wanted them to play with the drum machine. They'd never done that before. Those old prog rock bands never played with drum machines. Apart from Genesis started to do it in the late 70s. Genesis actually were very good at it. They actually integrated the whole new sequencing software into the sound of Genesis. But Yes, we're a lot more, what's the word for it, resistant. Possibly because they were much better musicians and they hated playing with a click. But in the end, it worked pretty well. So the difference was, I'll never forget the end of when we finished that album, 90125, and we were in the mastering room. Chris Squire said to me, "It's all right for you. You don't have to do anything. You go home now. We have to go out on tour. We have to promote it. And you get the same amount of money as us," because I'd agreed to have the same share as a band member. And the first tour that they did after 90125, they each earned $1 million. Things had turned around. They changed manager. The other manager had been ripping them off. It's funny how things happen.
I think it must be really interesting being a producer. And what's incredible is you seem to have produced everyone who's anyone in the music world over your career. Is there when you're choosing sort of who you're going to work with, is there a uniting thread that sort of ties Robbie Williams, the Pet Shop Boys, and all these people?
I think the thing that ties them together is that they wanted to work with me. Producers don't really pick people. I don't go, hey, I want to do something with that person, because it doesn't work like that. Particularly, people sort of people approach you rather than you going after them. And when I'd be interviewed in America and people say, was there anybody you'd have liked to have worked with? I used to say Bob Dylan. I'd love to have worked with Bob Dylan. I'd love to have done an album. Bob sings songs from the shows, or songs from films. I was just being funny, Can you imagine Bob Dylan singing, "Love lives us up where we belong, on a mountainside"? I can't see it, but it would have been funny. And people have actually taken me seriously. And really, Bob's meant to be pretty producer-proof, from what I've heard.
So if you could pick any artist sort of living, who would it be?
Oh, somebody to work with?
Yeah.
It's whoever's got the best song. It's the songs that are the hardest thing to find. You know, I was judging the Mercury Awards about 5 years ago, and supposedly we were hearing all of the best songs from that year. And it shocked me how few songs that were there that were I thought were really good. I think one of them was, you know, one of the best songs was Jake Bug, the lightning something or other. It was like a sort of folk, but it surprised me how few good songs there are. And to me, the artist's one thing, it's the song, you know. The song's the interesting thing. If you know, if I called up Ed Sheeran tomorrow and said, "Hey Ed, I'd like to produce you," I don't think I'd get very far. You know, people have their own producers and people that they've worked with, and sometimes I've had to work with other producers when I'm doing songs for films because the artist will arrive with another producer, and that's quite an interesting experience.
What makes a good song?
Well, you tell me. It's you know them when you hear them, but it's something that, I don't know, pop songs are funny things. When you talk about them and you actually say the lyrics out loud, they seem so stupid sometimes. And yet a song and the way it's done can have such an effect on you, take you back to a place, make you think of something. Songs from a period generally will capture the mood of people, you know, how they're feeling about things, will be somehow reflected in the lyrics from an era. I mean, if you listen to the lyrics from songs in the 30s and the 40s, the content is quite different, you know, what they're talking about. If you listen to songs from the 80s, I don't know what they're talking about half the time. And you asked me what makes a good song. Well, you can be sort of a little bit scientific about it, right? And you can say, well, a good song is actually 5 ideas. You know, it's like what you would call a verse, chorus, a bridge, an intro, and a middle 8. 5 components. And what I find happens the most is that people will have a good idea for a lyric. Now, I'm not saying this is a good idea, but say the lyric was, "I want you to go," right? So they'll write something, they'll lead up to a chorus and they'll go, "I want you to go, I want you to go," and then that's it. That's never enough, you know. All of the good, really good songs have got a great verse, a bridge that builds up into an exciting chorus, a runoff from the chorus where the music keeps going in a really good way. You know, all those kind of things that if you don't know, you know, a lot of people just don't write. So mostly it's finding more ideas in the song, you know, like that's my biggest problem generally when people play me stuff. 99% of songs that people play me I hate. So and I was hopeless when I was working in the record label because I used to just hate everything. Apart from maybe one thing, and I'd like Relax or something, you know. I heard Relax, I like that. It's nothing to do with the quality of the production on the demo, and in fact, sometimes, you know, professional writers have ways of making you think, and particularly guys in record labels think that their song is good when it isn't really. It just sounds like a good song, but it has nothing in it. You know, the original that it's based on was probably written from the heart by some guy who really felt angry about something or something, and professional songwriters will just rehash them, you know. So it's hard to find good songs.
So looking back at the songs that you have produced and things you've worked on, what bit of production are you sort of most proud of?
I think some of the Frankie Goes to Hollywood stuff was some of the best sounding stuff anybody ever did in the 80s. Just purely sonically, it was spectacular, some of it. The sound of it, that was mainly due to a guy called Stephen Lipson, who was quite a brilliant engineer and it ended up being a producer, you know, produced Annie Lennox, and he produces Hans Zimmer's scores now. But he and I worked together for 5 years. So I was pretty sort of think that's good, and I think "Slave to the Rhythm" is one of those things that wouldn't have existed. That song, if I hadn't gone a bit mad and had the idea of doing it over a go-go beat, I don't think that would have happened. So I'm quite proud of that one, I suppose.
And just turning back to this very eclectic group of performers and singers you've worked with, you must really get to know someone in the sort of production process. Has anyone surprised you and been very different to how you expected?
Well, Seal was pretty different to what I expected, because when I first saw him, he was 6'5". I mean, Seal's 6'5" in his stocking feet. Back then he had dreadies and he had a pair of Cuban heel boots on, so he was pretty close to 7 feet. And he was wearing a coat. And I saw him across the room. My wife said, "This is the guy we're going to sign." And I was like, "Do you think he and I will have anything in common?" I mean, he looks pretty imposing, you know. But then from the first moment I started talking to him, I realized that my preconceptions, I'd never really met an African man before. And I was fascinated, you know. Seal has the best manners just about of any man I know. You know, opening doors for people, just being kind and considerate. And the first thing he said to me was, I was mixing a track with the guy called Terry Reid had sung. Terry Reid's old singer from the 60s, brilliant singer. And Seal said, "Oh God, he's got a great voice, hasn't he?" And I thought, oh, that's a good sign. Because I always think people who are really good don't care. They're not jealous of other people, and so they can praise them and they're not feeling insecure. And so I always like it when somebody likes somebody else, you know. I mean, I've had a couple of hilarious meetings with artists where they spend the first half hour dissing their previous producer, and then they want me to produce them. I think like, God, I'm going to produce you, and then I'll be the one that gets dissed, you know. So you have to like people because you're going to spend a lot of time with them. And Seal's quite funny, and he's got a very naughty sense of humor. He loves, you know, double entendres and all that kind of stuff. And in fact, if anybody says anything around Seal, he and I always look at each other. If somebody says, "Can you take that up the octave?" You know, that's generally take it up the octave is generally a sort of time for humor. So, but you know, when you make a record with somebody, you've got to like them, you've got to get on with them. You know, ABC, I liked ABC, they were good fun to be around. Grace Jones was a good laugh too, but didn't see much of her. You know, but when she was there, she was definitely a presence.
So I've got a few more questions. I want to give the members a chance. I'm going to ask one more thing.
Okay.
You've presided over the beginning of so much and all these sort of exciting innovations. Looking forward, what do you think's next?
Death. For me, anyway. Sorry to be gloomy. Looking forward, I don't know. To me, the music scene is all dependent on who's in it. If there was somebody here now who loved country music and decided that they were going to write a new kind of country music and they were going to go into that medium and revolutionize it, then we might see an upsurge in country music. It's all down to people wanting to do things, really. You know, taking an interest in doing stuff. I don't think that you can really sort of predict it. I mean, music, if you think, you know, I've watched it now 50 years, and certain things have never changed. The music that's played at the weekend is basically music to accompany mating, or the thoughts of mating, and so all of the lyrics relate to mating and having children, ultimately, in some kind of way. Love past, love coming, love that you missed, you know. That's never changed. With a great big thumping beat, it's the same, that's all the same. What's really changed is, obviously, demographics have changed. And so there's a lot more hip hop now than there ever was back in you know, my day, because that reflects the you know, society. I honestly don't know. I don't hear any movements of any description. It's almost like everything has been isolated and it's all in its little pockets, and within each little, I was on a show where they were all DJs and they keep referring to like DJ Nutbuster, DJ Gravel Voice, DJ this, or a Raging DJ, all these names of exotic names of people who probably are quite ordinary, but when they're making records and DJing, they have these crazy names, and you'll say, DJ Nutbuster, I've never heard of him. Haven't you heard of, Get Your Nuts Out? It's a classic. No? To me, a lot of it's like that now,
On that, I'm going to give our members a chance to ask questions, and that was an extremely fast hand. So
Hello. Thank you very much for coming. My dad was a music journalist in the 1980s, and the consequence of that was that I grew up listening to propaganda and the Pet Shop Boys and ABC and nothing else. So my favourite song of all time is the 10-minute version of Dr. Mabuse. And the reason that I love it so much is I just have this image of you going completely mad with the drums and the stuff that go on for about 4 minutes. And you sort of, the idea of a producer just literally losing their mind and producing something completely bonkers and yet so brilliant. And I just wondered, is there anything about that song that I should know that would make me love it even more?
Dr. Mabuse? Well, I remember I listened to some stuff by Einstadt's Neubauten, and I was quite intrigued by it. And I was thinking about, I had Louis Jardine coming in to put percussion on Dr. Mabuse. And I was sitting having breakfast, and I looked out, and there was a great big iron bathtub out in the garden because they'd been pulling out bathrooms in the house. I thought, wow, so I got my roadie to throw it in the van, and I went and I bought a sledgehammer and a few other things. And then I went to a crockery shop, and it was so funny because the guy kept saying, what sort of china are you after, sir? And I was like, how much does it cost? What's the cheapest white one? Great, I'll have a whole set of that. And do you want the, I'm just going to break it all, right? So I just want it. And I took all of this into the studio, and we put a great big tarpaulin on the floor, and we set up the bathtub, sledgehammers. I had an axe and a few other things and some wood. And I had a great big step ladder. And my main memory from that session is the sight of Louis Jardine, who's a big fella, smoking a cigar. He's Portuguese, with a pair of great big boots on up at the top of this step ladder, pouring buckets of crockery into this great big tub. And we had microphones in the tub. So that's what's on Dr. Mabuse. What was your father's name?
David Bradwell. He was like freelance. Tells me about how he went to Jean-Michel Jarre's flat and asked him loads of questions about things. It all sounds very cool.
Because I once did something really daft to a journalist called Jack Barron. Remember Jack Barron? I had a starting pistol. And Jack Barron had once written a bad review of one of my records. And I knew he was upstairs interviewing Frankie Goes to Hollywood. So I burst in with a gun and I said, you bastard. I read that review and I shot him with the gun. And he jumped up in the air. And I wrote about it in the I should never have done it. I mean, God, I'd never dare do that now. I mean, I'd be in so much trouble. But that was the 80s. Thanks, anyway. Thanks for the question.
Just there. Second row.
Hello. I have a similar experience of having really grown up with that kind of era's music. And I wanted to ask you about particular tracks that you might have felt weren't given their due because of the sort of overshadowing success of hits like Video Killed the Radio Star. And in particular, I'm thinking of my relationship to that album. And when I would go and visit my grandma, who lived in the middle of nowhere and had no internet, and I was a teenager or 12, 11, right. And I just had nothing to listen to really. And she said, well, look at your mum's old records. And Video Killed the Radio Star was there. And I absolutely fell in love with the whole thing. And Clean Clean is one of my favorite songs of all time. And then I had this feeling of wanting to go back to the music. And actually, 5 years ago, that album wasn't even on Spotify in full. It
wasn't, yeah.
No, and I remember going back to it recently and finding out that it was actually all there and going, oh, thank God, can send these tracks to people. But I found myself waiting to go back to my grandma's house so I could listen to those tracks again.
Oh, that's nice.
And there's so many things on that album, amazing songs, that if they wouldn't have been overshadowed by that track, they might have been more popular.
I think what it boils down to is in music. There used to be a saying that a single was a hit. A hit single was a hit record. A hit album was an artist, meaning that you would almost establish yourself as an artist with an album. But it's quite hard to get people to listen to albums. Sometimes, especially when you, as you rightly pointed out, the first single is so big it eclipses everything else. But you have to go out and play a lot. You have to go to your audience and sell your wares, really. And we never did that, you see. We just came from out of the blue. There was no story about us. We weren't somebody who played in a venue somewhere and had lots of credibility. I mean, we had. Jeff and I had been playing, we'd been musicians since we were kids. But we didn't have I didn't have that sort of idea of, projecting myself as somebody else. I mean, when I met ABC had a manifesto, which they showed me, this is our manifesto. This is what we're going to achieve, and this is how we're going to do it. And this is how we're going to present ourselves. And if you produce us, you will be the most fashionable producer in the world. Because we are the most fashionable band in the world. I love it when people say stuff like that, because at least it's, at least you're aiming for something. So what was you were asking?
Any specific tracks that you can think of now where you go, oh, I wish that one was better received, or I know that was a good track and it didn't become the hit that I thought it would, or that it was simply overshadowed? Do you have any favourite tracks?
Well, in a funny way, in terms of commercial success, a song like Slave to the Rhythm was a bit like that, where because Grace wouldn't promote it, it never really got further than 12 or 13, and yet it's one of the best records I ever made. I mean, I'm sure that people who do paintings are kind of like, why do they always like the Mona Lisa? I've done loads of other things, They keep on about her. I never even liked her. I think that's one of the things that happens when you do things. I think things like Propaganda had some, Jewel and things like that were really good songs, and I think they got overlooked a little bit.
So you mentioned Frankie Goes to Hollywood. And I was kind of thinking, because I believe one of their tracks was banned by the BBC. I think it was Relax in 80s.
It was Relax, yeah.
Yeah. Do you think they were deliberately provocative to do that? Is there kind of political reasons?
Well, when I first saw them, the photographs that they were giving out to people were those, it was the very early days of gay culture being very overground. And they had these pictures where they were wearing those bum splitter leather trousers, where there's no back in them. And Paul had a knife coming out of his fly, and somebody was giving the knife a blowjob. Those were the photographs that I saw. I think that frightened off a lot of the record labels. What was the question again? I got talking, I forget the question. Pardon? They were being deliberately provocative, but they didn't get banned because of that. They got banned because of Paul Morley, another music biz journalist, because he wrote some things on the sleeve that we never saw. Me and my late wife Jill, who had the record label, we never seen this stuff. We only saw it when that was Paul's department, and he'd written some kind of weird stuff that's not really my kind of thing. Lick the shit off my boots, or something like that. Was a kind of some ritualized sayings on the single that Mike Reed suddenly picked up on. You see, when Holly sang Relax, he sang When You Want to Sock It To It, spelled S-O-C-K to it. He didn't sing When You Want to Suck It, Chew It, that he claims, because I wouldn't have let him, right? Because I would have figured we'll get banned immediately if you sing Suck It, Chew It. I knew that it was about, sex. I'm not pretending. And I kind of amplified that aspect of it by putting a huge orgasm on it. So, because once I started thinking about it, I got more into it. But that was the reason. And when it came to the album, Welcome to the Pleasure Dome, I said to Jill, we got to check the album artwork. Have you seen it yet? No. Right, we better get it. There were 32 sexual acts between animals on the artwork. and we had a right shout out with Paul, because Paul was like, this is censorship. And I was saying, maybe it's censorship, but my God, if we try and put this out, the women will walk out of the factory. They won't put the albums in the sleeve. Sometimes you have to say no. Funny enough, I tell you another story. I was with Jimmy Iovine. You'll have to cut this out. I was with Jimmy Iovine, and Jimmy Iovine's the guy that had Interscope Records, signed Snoop Dogg. Dr. Dre was his big signing, right? And I met them all. I met Death Row Records dude and everything. And Jimmy was, I never say no to my artists. That's the reason Dre's with me. I never say no. Right? Cut to about a year later, I went in to see Jimmy about something completely unrelated, and there was this incredible artwork on the table, and it was a guy with a huge erection and a 5-year-old girl. They weren't having sex, but they were in the same picture. And Jimmy was on the phone. He was going, no, Dre, this can't be the artwork. So everybody has to say no sometimes, And we put fig leaves over all of the pictures.
I'm really interested in the kind of process you take when you're producing, because when I think of producers that I admire, they all seem to have very different kind of like philosophies or like approaches to how you go from the idea in the form of a demo or some sketches or something like that, and to kind of turn that into a song. So I think of like Rick Rubin or something, who like breaks it down into the elements, or like, people like, I don't know, I've read about like Brian Eno, like starting with like a kind of core of the track and then building out from there. So what's your kind of like process? How do you start, and where does the song go from there when you've got an idea?
Well, if it's a song that somebody's written and they've got a demo of it, I listen to the demo and keep every good idea from the demo and start from there. There's no point in trying to reinvent something if somebody's come up with a good idea. I always start with whatever people give me, and there's always you have to. Brian Eno's produced a lot of really good things. He was good for U2, but he doesn't really do pop records in the same way. He's did one or two and did quite well with them. I think in a way you have to let the song determine what you do. If someone's written you can change chords and you can change stuff for people. It depends what they want. Don't forget, a lot of the time I'm being hired to finish something off for somebody, so I have to keep within what they like and what they want, and everybody, integrity, or what people call integrity, or their integrity is variable, a bit like time, or whatever they say, the theory of speed of light, time, how time is actually. So is taste, everyone's got a different taste. If you're working with the Pet Shop Boys, everything's got to be on the beat. I used to say no feel zone, no feel. By feel I mean rock and roll sloppiness, You can't have anything like that. Everything's got to be perfect, because you can't have anything in the backing track that's going to overpower Neil's voice, or distract you from it. And Neil's voice needs a certain amount of space because it has a certain vibe to it. You don't want to be all over it. Everybody's sort of different. And some people, it doesn't work, it doesn't work. They play you their song and they want you to work with them, and groups are the worst for it, I've found, where you rearrange their song for them because it's very amateurish. And then they come in the next day and they want to do it like the way they originally did it, because that's what they're used to. And this is going out on a bit of a limb, and, so it can be quite hard. It's much easier when there's just a singer. So I don't know. I mean, I listen to this, when you say my man, I listen to this song a lot and figure out how is this going to work best? What can I do with it? How can I make the chords complement the tune better? That kind of stuff. And then hopefully my idea will resonate with the singer. Singers are quite, as long as they sound good, then you're okay. So you make sure the money sounds good, you can get away with a lot in the backing track, If they don't sound good, your goose is cooked immediately.
Talking of a good singer, can you tell us a little bit about working with Terry Reid?
Most of you probably won't know who Terry Reid is. Terry Reid was a singer from the 60s whose nickname was Leather Lungs because he had such an incredibly powerful voice. But he also had the most beautiful, gentle voice, and he was able to go from this beautiful sort of tender sound to this rah sound. And he had his own band, and he was just starting to break in the late 60s when Led Zeppelin were formed. And Jimmy Page called him up and offered him the gig in Led Zeppelin. And he said, nah, I can't do it. I've got a tour. But I know a guy, he's from Birmingham, and he'll be perfect for you. The only problem is he comes with a drummer, but it shouldn't be a problem because the drummer is really good too. And that's how kind of, Robert Plant and John Bonham ended up, because they both came from Birmingham. They were both like local musicians in Birmingham, whereas, Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones were both session guys in London. So that's how they got together. What was the question again?
Gives me a chance to say it on the microphone. Basically, just have you got any sort of background about working with Terry and how that came about?
So I met Terry because I was doing a movie. Hans Zimmer flew me over to America. Days of Thunder. It wasn't a great film, Tom Cruise and Robert Duvall and everything. And they wanted a song for the end, and so I took a bit of Hans Zimmer's score and wrote some lyrics to it, and for some, they introduced me to Terry Reid, and Terry Reid lived in Laurel Canyon, and I went to meet him one night, and he was such a character because he's from Cambridge. He used to go walk around, with all the shotguns. His father had a farm. He's very sort of country Terry, And so I used to go up to his every evening up into Laurel Canyon, and we wrote this song. It was called The Driver. The movie was about driving. And we were due to record it on a Friday night. Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer were producing the film. And they suddenly called me up and said, Billy Idol's written a better song. Well, they didn't say he's written a better song, but Billy Idol was a much bigger name than Terry Reid. And Billy was really big at that particular point in time. And so I was sent up to Billy Idol's house. I'd never met him before. And he'd written this song called I Don't Want to Be Cheated, which I hated. Because I thought, I didn't hate it when he sang it, but I kind of hated it, when somebody else sang it. Because, we got bumped. Our song, The Driver, got bumped. And I had to record this, I Don't Want to Be Cheated. Here I stand, the burning man, singing a song of my open soul. Singing a song of my open soul made me cringe a bit, But that's what happens sometimes when you're a producer. You have to do these things. And Terry was very upset and he got really drunk, and I had to hold him up at the mic stand because I said, come on, I can afford, they won't notice it. We can have one day in the studio and at least we'll finish the song that we wrote, even if it's not going to go in the movie. And it's on one of his albums. It's called The Driver. Billy Idol was meant to sing the Burning Man song, where in the end, at the last minute, his record label wouldn't let him. So I had to do it with David Coverdale. David Coverdale was a very completely different kettle of fish to Billy Idol. Because when Billy first sang the song to me, I cried with laughter at the end of it. And I said to him, you should be a comedian. That was so funny, the way you sang it. Because, Billy kind of does Elvis Presley like this, kind of. And he's funny. David Coverdale doesn't have much of a sense of irony. And so it was quite hard to get the song out of him. So that was Terry. And, I did a song called The 5th of July with him. But, Terry was really difficult to work with at that point. It's only because I loved him, really, kind of you meet people and you just love them sometimes. And you feel kind of an empathy for them. He used to come in every day to sing and he'd be plastered within an hour. And one day I tried a bottle of non-alcoholic wine. I said, Terry, I got you some wine. Oh, Trev, thanks. What the fuck's that? Non-alcoholic wine, Terry. But what a singer. Anyway, there you go. That's Terry Reid.
Hiya. So I was just wondering, do you keep in contact with Jeff and Hans from the Buggles, or do you feel like you've kind of leaned away from them almost?
I saw Hans not long ago because he was going around with his 60-piece orchestra. And he asked me if I'd get up and do Video Killed the Radio Star with him. Because Hans was very briefly in the Buggles. And whenever I do Video Killed the Radio Star, I always do a bit of a rap in the middle of it because, that will.i.am did a cover of it, called Check It Out. And he wrote a rap, and I loved it so much that I use it. And so I wrote a rap for me and Hans that kind of went somewhat like this, I step into the party like my name is Mr. T. All these crap film composers have got nothing on me. Honestly, I'm as fly as I can be. Listen to my records, get a super OG. And then Hans's bit that I wrote for him went, my name is Hans Zimmer. They call me Big Zim. I've got a much bigger orchestra than him. I've scored more films than any other brother. Then together we were meant to say, if you see us coming, better lock up your grandmother. And then I have two other lines that went, you were in my band when you were 23. I never thought that you would be famouser than me. Which was true. I never thought it. Hans never learnt it. He cocked it up every time. But I tried. Because he was always incredibly busy, and I'd get in his dressing. Come on, Hans, come on. My name is Hans. Trevor, I'd be okay. Hans, try and get the rhythm of it. He's funny. He's very sweet. I still talk to him sometimes. I did a note for his Prague tour, pretending it was from the Buggles. Dear Hans, we've decided you can come back into the Buggles. Let's face it, this film music's going nowhere. We've got a couple of rewind festivals. We can't wait to see you. I was being funny, obviously. He's very charming, Hans. You'd like him. You should get him to come here and talk. Out of all the film composers I've ever met, he's quite incredible because he's done, he's done lots of scores that I haven't liked much, but he's done like 3 or 4 that I think are brilliant. Black Hawk Down, I thought was absolutely brilliant. And so Gladiator, I thought was amazing because he actually came up with a new cliche. But the film music business, I was talking to him about something not long ago, and he was telling me, I get so tired. People want me to do Gladiator again, It's always the same in the business where you sell yourself. But he's a lovely guy.
Hi. I'm ancient enough to remember you in the charts and counting down on the charts. Now, since COVID, we've had an explosion of people coming back live. Who would you like to return and perform live?
Who would I like to come back to see playing live again? Oh, that's a difficult question. I think most of the people that can are doing it. Because they need to earn money. After coronavirus, it really hit everybody pretty hard. I mean, I can't tell you how many techs left the business. I mean, I used to own rehearsal studios and recording studios. I've sold them all. The rehearsal room business was a rehearsal rooms in back line. And I was lucky because somebody bought me out. But that whole business, touring, it just fell off the edge of a cliff. People with warehouses full of equipment, technicians, and loads of them left. And now it's really hard when you're doing a tour. It's hard just to get the technicians, So many people left the business. Who would I like to see back on the road? I wouldn't mind seeing the Police play live again in small clubs. I'd pay £1,000 to go and see the Police in a tiny place, not in some bloody great big arena, It's unlikely though. Yeah, I mean, I went to see the Rolling Stones a few years ago and they were still great. They're back out again. I mean, they can't get enough of it really, can they? The live business is quite strange. There aren't many people from the new generation that can really sell a lot of tickets. You can count them on one hand, really. Ed Sheeran, Florence and the Machine, maybe. Not many, really. Muse, 1975. Yeah, maybe. But it's difficult for me to sometimes. I go to shows, and because I know the mechanics of it, I can tell that most of it's coming from track. It's so easy these days to have a backing track on a hard drive and to be playing along with elements of it. I went to see one band that my girlfriend is a big fan of. I'm not going to name them because you filmed this. And I said to her, who's actually playing? I'm watching the bass player. He ain't playing what I'm hearing. I know about bass and that's not what he's playing. She said, everything's to track. They play a bit on top of it. But to me, that's a little bit, for the era that I come from, that's like cheating, Anybody can do that, but that's what DJs do anyway. I mean, that's probably the limit of what they do. If I wanted to make money, that's what I should do. I'm constantly gobsmacked at how much these DJs make from their residencies and the way that some of them are okay, but it's difficult because I'm an old musician, and so I think in terms of people playing. So the Police, would be great to see them back on the road. Great.
How did it come to be that Video Killed the Radio Star was on MTV as the first song? Did you know in advance? Excuse me. Or did you it was just on and you're like, oh my God, my song's like the biggest music video ever?
I only heard about it, I think, when I was on tour with Yes in America in 1980. When did it? No, it must have been after that.
81, I think.
Because it was 81. I wasn't aware that it was the first video until somebody told me. MTV have never called me up and talked to me about it or given me a diploma or anything. Just everyone keeps telling me. And so normally when people tell me, I say, yeah, how do I monetize it? Tell me how to monetize it. I don't know if it's such a great thing, really. I mean, I don't know about you. Do you ever watch MTV? I don't. I think people stopped watching it. For about a year, it was fantastic. And then it's like anything, you just start to hate it. So I don't believe the video did actually kill the radio star. It knocked him down for a round or two, but then he got back up again, like Tyson Fury.
We've got time for 2 more questions. Make them good. Just at the back there first.
Hi, thanks for coming. I was just wondering if there's any projects or tracks you've worked on that weren't released at the time, and you still kind of like them or kind of regret that they never came out?
Tracks that I did that weren't released at the time. Yeah, there was a couple of tracks. There was a track called Docklands that I did with a group called the Mint Tulips that, because we fell out with them, never really came out. But I'm sort of sitting on a bunch of tracks that I've been working on for the past year. And I've got a couple of pretty good ones. I mean, if people are interested, I've got a great one of Tori Amos doing a Kendrick Lamar cover that we did. It's turned out really well, where we've turned like a rap tune into a song. Because I was looking for songs with really good lyrics, and there aren't many in this particular tune. I think it's called Drank. It's got a brilliant lyric. I've got Toya singing Relax, and Mark Arman singing Love is the Battlefield. So I've been doing sort of, I'm always doing stuff. I don't know if anybody listened to it. I think that's the fate of all old producers and all old artists, is that they spend the latter years of their life making music that not too many people ever hear. But still you do it anyway, because you hear it.
It's so indulgent of me to ask again, but I just, as you were talking, thought of two other very short questions. One is, when in the late 1980s, Neil Tennant talks about how the Pet Shop Boys were in their imperial phase and kind of on top of the world and absolutely flying. And that coincided with when you worked with them on Left to My Own Devices and It's All Right. And my first question, I guess, is I just wonder, what was that like? And did you feel the sort of the hype and the momentum around them at the time? And then my second question is, you're doing all this pop stuff that's very big and very, must have been massive adrenaline rush. And then the other stuff that I know you for is like Moments in Love and The Art of Noise and kind of objectively weird stuff. And I wondered how, at the time, you sort of, one, why you did that, and also what it was like to be in those two mindsets at once.
Well, the question about the Pet Shop Boys, Neil used to be a journalist, so the pair of them are, and Chris should have been in the Morton Fraser harmonica gang as the sour-faced guy. I think that's what his father used to do. I thought they were they did that sort of two guys, one guy with the keyboard and one guy just singing. I thought they did it brilliantly. And because Neil used to be a journalist, I could sit and listen to Neil talk all day. And that thing about the imperial phase and then survival is so true. And that was definitely their imperial phase. They were, they were just great company. That's in Left to My Own Devices, they used a line from me because Neil said to me one day, "What are you doing next?" And I said, "I'm going to set Debussy to a disco beat." And he liked that so much, he put it in the song. He asked my permission first, and I let him do it, but they were really imaginative. And because Neil didn't come from the music business, like he wasn't an old singer that had done clubs and stuff like that, he had a sort of much more rarefied kind of vibe about him. And he was much more kind of, I suppose, more interested to talk to. There was a second part to that question. What was it? And how you do commercial stuff and weird stuff and whatever. I was excited by the idea of, the one idea that I had at the beginning of the 80s was that I loved Kraftwerk, and I wanted to try and mix Kraftwerk and Vince Hill. The idea of mainstream crap pop, but done with a machine, was the idea that really drove me. And I suppose because in a way, all of the 70s, when you got to the end of the 70s, if you were producing records, you were competing with Elton John, Queen. Killer Queen has never been bettered. It's like the same as Frank Sinatra singing, I've Got You Under My Skin, has never been bettered. It was fantastic. I realized at the end of the set, there's no way that I'm going to be able to fight my way into that. I'm not talented enough. But techno stuff, I liked that. And I loved the Man Machine. Was like, woof, this could be incredible. This is something really interesting and new, where you don't have to play everything. You can get a computer to play it. Hence the name The Buggles. The Buggles was just a stupid, they'll never be as big as the Buggles. The Buggles were meant to be a fictitious band that a couple of guys in the basement of a record label thought up and then wrote the song on a computer. But we thought of this in 1978 when you couldn't do songs on computers, you know. This was, you know, everybody warned me that it was a stupid name. You know, like Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark is a much better name. You know, it talks of all kinds of interesting things. Buggles is just crap. My late wife said to me, you know, you'll regret it. And I've had it around me for so long now that I don't care anymore. Somebody said, you know, I play bass guitar in a Dire Straits cover band. It's not really a cover band because it's got 4 of the original members in it. But I was doing a radio interview and some stupid guy said to me, so you were in Dire Straits? I was like, I said, look, I've been on the computer, but I don't think any Buggles were in the Dire Straits. You know, I've got used to it now. So I, you know, I thought it was funny at the time. But there you go.
Well, Trevor, thank you so much for coming. This has been such an interesting interview. I feel like I've learned so much about the music industry over 50 years, which is brilliant. Could you all join me in thanking Trevor for being our final speaker of Michaelmas Term?
Thank you. You're welcome.